What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the TDR Devy Show. We're talking Devy/Dynasty startups, baby. This is my favorite topic. We do this every year, and I think it's fun because it's different. No one really does it, and they don't really do these type of podcasts or shows. And really what we did is we did a 16-round startup with everything included. You want to know the 27 class? You want to know the 25 class that's coming in? You want to know the Dynasty guys, where they're going at right now? Everything is included there in a 12-team Superflex tight end premium. What's the mock value? Right now, you get to see where your Devy assets are regulated to your NFL assets. Who are some guys out there from a dynasty perspective that could be buys or sells? We're going to go into that. Really, it's an all-encompassing draft here to see your values for your Devy dynasty players and have a little fun looking at dynasty trades, looking at dynasty values, and just chopping it up. We're degenerates. We like doing dynasty Devy mocks in November, and it's a lot of fun, even to see where the 25 class is at. All right, so we're going to start with rounds 1 through 4. Now, if you listen to the podcast, I can't go through every single guy drafted because that is a terrible podcast. So what we're going to talk about here is just our biggest takeaways. Now, if you're on this podcast, hop over to YouTube. You can see the screenshots, so you can really kind of dive into every pick if you want to. But from a dynasty takearounds from this rounds 1 through 4, the big thing for me, first of all, is QB tiers. So when you're thinking about where are these QBs getting drafted, where, when you're thinking of like, hey, who do you want as your QB1? Where does that QB2/1, where does it go away at? Like, where is that like uncomfortability going? Maybe it's the Purdy side, right? Sitting there at 207 was where he got drafted here. Or Trevor Lawrence going in the 3rd round. Like, how comfortable are you with some of those guys there? What is your takeaway from the quarterback kind of tiers here, Jay?
Yeah, I'd say like where that fringe kind of roundish is Purdy, Caleb, Drake. I think that's kind of where it is. So I like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jane Daniels. I think that's kind of a tier. Then you got like Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud-ish. He might be in the next tier, but that's kind of a tier. Then right now, Mahomes used to be in tier 1. If you were doing startups last offseason, you were drafting Mahomes in tier 1. Now we're kind of looking at Mahomes in a tier 3 with Jordan Love there. And then I'd say the next tier for me would be like Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert. And then after that, it's Purdy, Caleb, and Drake May. And so I think right there is kind of after that, I think it gets a little fringy. So you mentioned a couple quarterbacks, but I think that's kind of where I would draw the line on the
yeah. I think Herbert and May, and this is pretty good value going after Purdy when you're looking at that, sitting at that 208, 209 mark. You combine like the Lamar Jackson owner got Drake May as his QB2. Pretty good value there. Jaden Daniels and Justin Herbert is a hell of a stack, I think, especially with Jaden Daniels' upside. And Herbert's kind of solid floor. I think what we're seeing in this offense might not be amazing, but they're using them. They utilize him as a rushing threat in the red zone. They saw that last week when they played the Titans. Like, you've seen that there. So I think the QB tier is interesting in there. The other one I wanted to kind of talk about, you're not going to see a ton of running backs, but the ones you did see, you saw Bijan Robinson, Gibbs, Hall. Those are your running backs 1, 2, and 3. Running back 4 is a Devy player. We're going to get into that. That is our guy, Ashton Genty. We're going to talk about how high he went. We're going to be doing Devy takeaways each for these 4 rounds that we do as well. So if you're looking at the board, on YouTube, you're like, hey, who the hell drafted, Duke Johnson? Those guys were placeholders for Devy guys. I'm gonna give you guys who those guys are in a minute as we go through there. But I do want to talk about Ndunze versus Brian Thomas Jr. So when you're looking at where they got drafted, both in the 3rd round, Ndunze went before Brian Thomas Jr. At that 309-ish mark, and then Brian Thomas went at 312. I drafted Brian Thomas. Full disclosure, I was in this draft. So what is your take there between those two guys? Who would you rather have?
Yeah, I would go with Brian Thomas Jr. as the guy I'd take over Rome Odunze. And let me explain. So, I'm sort of a data guy, so I'm just kind of looking through the numbers so far. And this doesn't include this week that we had today because games aren't finished. But so PFF receiving grade wise, Brian Thomas Jr. 79, Rome Odunze 62.9. Receiving yards, Brian Thomas Jr. 607. Going into this week, that was the high watermark for wide receivers, rookie wide receivers, 607 yards. Rome Odunze 414 yards. Receiving touchdowns, Brian Thomas Jr. 5, Rome Odunze 1. Yards per route run, Brian Thomas Jr. 2.22, Rome 1.29. Yak per reception, again, Brian Thomas Jr. 6.1 Rome's 5.1. Now, we're not all the way through the season, but I'd say these are kind of similar situations, right? So you both have very young, the high prospect profile type quarterbacks in Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams. They were both taken in the first round. Obviously, Rome Odunze before that, and they both seem to be in coaching situations that are sort of iffy at the moment, and it might be iffy for some time. And then you look at the competition between them. Who else is catching passes? So Brian Thomas Jr.'s his competition is Christian Kirk, who's injured right now, and Gabe Davis, maybe a few other guys in there. And then Rome Odunze is DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, how long is he going to be around as well? But I think all of those situations lead me towards picking Brian Thomas Jr. And just because he's having a better season, he looks like a wide receiver one, a true wide receiver one in the offense, and just a slightly better situation there going forward. So that's who I pick.
Yeah, I mean, I took BTJ, but Nunze was always out the board. But I would honestly take Brian Thomas Jr. I think I'm there with him. I think that really just comes down to target competition, right? And I think that, even both are going to have new head coaches next year. Let's be clear. But I do think that, when you're looking at DJ Moore still possibly being there, I don't know what's going on there. Cole Kmet is there. I know Ingram on the other side, but really Brian Thomas Jr. is their wide receiver one. And so I tend to lean that way. I still believe in Trevor Lawrence. Him and Caleb, to me, are pretty kind of similar right now, unfortunately, for probably Caleb Williams owners out there, and where he got drafted. But I do think that when you're looking at it, I lean there. But I thought that was interesting. And right after that was Zay and Jackson Smith in the Jigba. I didn't take JSN, which it hurt me not to take him, but I took Zay over him there. I think JSN's ascending now. He had a pretty good game so far this week. But that's kind of generally our dynasty takeaways there. The one thing I want to talk about is a dynasty sell, because I told you guys we're going to be talking about trades here, and we're going to be going over this. I'm selling Jalen Waddle, and this hurts me. Jay's not going to, he's going to disagree with me here. So this is good. This is good for the show, as we call it. But I love Jalen Waddle. Everybody knows I was huge on Jalen Waddle coming in, and he had a great start to his career. But, man, he has just not been good. And this season, with Tua under center prior to this game, he's only had about a 14% target share. Now, when he gets targets, he produces. We've seen that, but he's just not getting them. And I don't know whether it's, what is it, scheme? Is it just like, are we talking about just lack of talent? Him and Tua are on the same page, and he just hasn't been consistent. His best week has been the first week. That was against Jacksonville. He had 109 yards. Outside of that, he has one touchdown all year. Really his weekly finish, the highest finish he's had in PPR is week 1, and that was 16 overall. And even today against Vegas in a game where they won 34-19, 3 targets, 2 catches, 37 yards. So to me, I'm kind of just out on Jalen Waddle. The new oncoming class coming in, you're going to see that value. And I understand that the thing is Tyreek's going to be old. He's going to be leaving. He's still a talent there. But if I can get some of these deals. Now, the one I wouldn't do is Olave. I'm kind of out on Olave as well. So, I would probably keep Jalen there. But some of these other deals that you see here, Waddle for a 27 first. We just talked about the 27 class recently. I don't mind pivoting there. I really don't, because I do think that 27 first is going to go up in value as we kind of get into this, as we get into this next season, as guys start really loving that class. And I could probably get a better wide receiver than Waddle with that pick if I needed to. Other ones, Jalen Waddle second for Tank Dell and a 25 first. I actually don't mind that because I'm getting the first back there. The deal that I thought was really fun was Kyler Murray, Jalen Waddle for JJ and Marvin Harrison Jr. I would smash the JJ side. We talked about that on our rank value show. We were talking about these guys. But what do you think? Where are you at on Jalen Waddle? Why am I wrong?
Well, I think this is a downer year, and you can say
downer 2 years. Whoa! He's not been great last year either.
So in 2021, he was 15.5 points per game. In 2022, he was 15.4 points per game. I can't remember what the finishes were, but they were very close to wide receiver one type finishes. Yeah. In 2023 is 14.2 points per game. So that was a down year. Maybe there's some reversion. Maybe you can think about it, but it's 1 full point down. But I guess it's trending down. This year has not been that good. This has not been a good year, obviously. Then you have the quarterback injury. So what that brought into this whole season is not great. And I would say is I caution to patience, because we've seen this Jalen Waddle have wide receiver one type finishes, or close to wide receiver one type finishes, high end wide receiver two finishes. And right now, he went from in the offseason trading basically wide receiver 11 prices to now trading at wide receiver 26 prices. So if you were going to sell, you sell in the offseason if you know ahead of time. But I guess you don't know that until it's actually happening, right? So now that we're down at wide receiver 26 prices, when he has the potential to get you, wide receiver 14 points per game type level, wide top 15 points per game levels. That's the kind of profile that I would typically try and buy and have some patience, and hopefully next year it turns around. But obviously this year down a year, and it could definitely move against you from that perspective, for sure.
I think the way I look at it, Jay has a good point. Like, we know Jay's smart. Like, hey, he was selling at wide receiver 11 prices in the summer, and now he's at 26. But to me, this is like, well, I think built in, you're still selling that he could possibly bounce back and be a high-end wide receiver too. But to me, I don't see it. So for my dynasty mind, I'm like, hey, if I don't expect him to get there, I'm going to still bank on that, because if he has a really bad year, or he continues to have this bad year, that price is going to depreciate, and it's still depreciating. There's something wrong with that offense. The offensive line isn't great. And this hurts me because I love Jalen Waddle. Like, I am a huge Jalen Waddle guy. I believe in his talent, but it's just not there right now. And if I can move out, pivot, do that last deal down there with Murray, Waddle, and McCarthy and Marvin Harrison, like a rebuilding type retooling team, I'm definitely doing that. Just going out there. But let's move on to Devy. So, this is, we're combined here. So I wanted to get you what you're going to see on the screen, or what you're listening to, is when they got drafted. So at 303, wide receiver 11 is overall. So that's combined with the dynasty guys. Jeremiah Smith is the first Devy player taken in the 2027 class. 304, running back 4. Let me say that again. Running back 4, Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. And then 307 was wide receiver 13 overall, Teteroa McMillan from Arizona. So 225 class guys here and 27 overall. My big thing for me is, we know Jeremiah Smith's a stud. He should be kind of at a top 12. In our combined rankings that we have on our Patreon, I think he's top 6, 7. Like, he's high. He's very high up there. So I understand that one. The thing I will get into is, if Ashton Jeanty is running back 4 right now, and I could get Gibbs or Breece Hall or even Bijan, I'd probably take that. Like, I think that even some of the other guys, Devon Chain, if I can get plus side on that, one of these wide receivers are there, I'm still selling. People hate it. I'm a hater. But if those type of prices, I think that I'm selling.
Yeah, I couldn't. That's some of the best dynasty advice you'll take away from this thing. If you can turn Ashton Jeanty into Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, maybe Breece Hall, that would be phenomenal. And really, what you're doing is you're basically giving up Ashton Jeanty, who is a maybe. Yes, he's going off. Yes, he's awesome. But he's still a maybe. He's still a college running back going to the NFL, for a Bijan, a Gibbs, and Hall, who we've seen it happen. So that's definitely probably the best piece of advice there that I go. One thing I'd mention, though, is I think these probably should be flipped. I think Teteroa McMillan, in the way that I think of things now, I think is probably the guy that has probably the most value. If we were doing a rookie draft, I'd probably select him 1.01 over Ashton Jeanty at 1.02. I think they're pretty close, but I think Teteroa McMillan is the guy that I see the most value in. Right now, you can see on here, we got him at wide receiver 13. I think he's a tier 1 prospect, and I think he deserves to be up there with some of the higher end wide receivers. And yeah, we have Jeremiah Smith. We see Jeremiah Smith going here at wide receiver 11. Maybe that should be higher, but he's a freshman. Teteroa McMillan's going to be in the NFL next year, playing, probably be a high end first round draft pick, and probably command quite a bit of value. And so that's the guy that I think probably you want to probably take Tet over Ashton Jeanty at this point. But we're doing a startup. You got to pick the players as they fall, and they're Ashton Jeanty at 4. The guys that you have around there or behind him, I guess, if he's at 4, is Saquon Barkley, which is getting older, Devin Achane, Kyron Williams, Jonathan Taylor. These, and then maybe if you want to do the win now, you got Christian McCaffrey and Kenneth Walker III in there as well. I mean, those are the guys that you get after Ashton Jeanty, after RB4. So it's not like a great landscape. So I can understand why you picked that. I just think that if I was in this startup mode, I'd probably be picking the the consistency and the long standing of a wide receiver that could be around for quite a while.
Yeah, 100%. I think wide receiver there. And yeah, this is not shitting on the Ashton Genty pick. I think at running back 4, that's actually probably appropriate value when you look at the landscape. I think a chain for me is a little higher there. But those other guys, I don't think I'd take him over Ashton just based on a value perspective and a running back perspective. If he goes in the first round, I think that's perfectly fair there. I think I take Tet over Drake London. I think I take Tet over Dunze, Hill. I think there's a line at Brian Thomas Jr. I think I still take Brian Thomas Jr. there, but I think Tet's in that range. I think that was a very good value there for him. Now, anything left on these picks of the Devy stuff or anything there before we get in the next 4 rounds? Nope. All right, let's jump over there. We're going to talk about the next 4 rounds here. Rounds 5 through 8, I think. 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I did my math correctly. I'm not a numbers guy. Jay's the numbers guy here on the show. So really with the dynasty takeaways from these rounds. So you're going to see some guys in there, quarterbacks. We'll get into Anthony Richardson going at the 5-12. Bo Nix playing very well, had another 3-touchdown game today at 5'11". Tua and Dak. So the quarterback tiers, you see those guys kind of go in that range. Now, as far as the things I want to talk about is the 0 running back build. So, we talked about the guys going in those first 4 rounds. Now here's the next round of guys. So Kyron Williams going in the 5th round, Ken Walker going in that 5th round. Then we see, we were going to see another Devy player get taken. Then James Cook is the next guy in that 7th round around Derrick Henry. But there are some guys that I would definitely build a 0 running back build around if this is where their value is at. And there's 2 guys that stand out to me, maybe 3, but if I say the 3rd one out loud, I kind of throw up a little bit in my mouth, just a little bit, but I do expect him to bounce back. But the first 2, Jonathan Brooks for Carolina. Like, I do think that, hasn't been out there yet. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen that consistency yet, but we expect big things possibly. But I do know Chuba Hubbard just signed a contract extension. So I think you're kind of eating into all right, what does that upside do? But Trey Benson to me is the perfect 0 running back build going at 7-12. Now, full disclosure, I drafted him, so I believe this too. But at 7-12, I just think if you're going to go 0 running back, build through the wide receiver quarterback position, which I did in the first 6 rounds. If I can get a guy like Trey Benson who could possibly just take over for James Conner next year, be a running back 1, I'm in that. And then the next guy is Travis Etienne. It's hard for me to say it, but I know that he's just not going to look good in Jacksonville, but I do think he's going to get an opportunity somewhere else. I think he'll set the market. I don't know how high that market's going to be for the running back free agents. And if you can get a guy like Etienne in the 8th, he just screams like Joe Mixon in the 9th, 10th round of the previous years. He just screams like that guy that could go set the market at running back in free agency, get a job out there to, have the volume, have the consistency, have the points, fantasy points there. And that's not a bad price for ETN. That's probably a 3 to 4 round discount from last year. I'll take that as my 0 running back bill. What do you think about these running backs in this range?
Yeah, I like all those suggestions. The one I'd pound the table on is Jonathan Brooks. So right now he's trading at running back 17 prices, and a lot of that is, well, he didn't quite come back from the injury like we expected or like was signaled, and also they gave money to Chuba Hubbard as well, who seems to be performing fairly well. So you think about the situation and how the running backs line up. But I do believe in Jonathan Brooks as a prospect, and if you can get him as your RB1 through that 0 RB build, that's a really good option there. And I do think Trey Benson's in a pretty good situation too, and I think James Conner probably moves on at some point here, and so he might be even in a more advantageous build. But right now, the guy I want to be out there buying is Jonathan Brooks. I think that it might not help you this year. It definitely won't help you this year, but next year, if you can buy him now at sort of lower prices and talk about, Chuba Hubbard and not coming back from the injury, I think that's the guy that you will probably want to get as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, and also when you look at the land of wide receiver 2s in this range, Rashee Rice is still there. I really like him. Honestly, I should have probably drafted him over Ladd McConkey, who was sitting there at 601. I took Ladd over Rice, which that was stupid in retrospect. I would have taken Rice at 602. That's a good draft pick there. T. Higgins is sitting out there as a wide receiver 2 range. DK Metcalf, McLaurin is still sitting out there. And then if you go even lower when you go into the 8th round, you're looking at Xavier Worley, Josh Downs, DJ Moore, Tank Dell. But there is a guy that I definitely want to talk about, and a guy that's kind of going in that range still of wide receiver 2 range. George Pickens sitting kind of like weird dynasty value. He's kind of going from like 19 to 16 on keep trade cut. Just depends on when you look. But I think he's kind of a buy right now, just based on the prices. Now, I'm going to tell you this because I just told you I was out on Olave. He's going George Pickens for Olave and a third. I am smashing the Pickens side. I just love that, you know, when you have Pickens, there's no say what he's going to do. He might punch a dude in the face. He might just launch out of bounds, but he's a fun player. But I do think from a production standpoint, he is going to provide you targets. Now, they might be feast or famine, but I do think he's a buy at current prices. Pickens for Darnell Mooney in a second. I'm okay giving up that. A late 25s first for Pickens. Based on the wide receiver class, if I'm looking at it and I think I need a wide receiver, I don't mind giving up those prices there. And an Addison in a second either. Like, there's no deal here where I'm like, I'm going to take that other side. What do you think about Pickens or even like the deals there? Are there any that you kind of flipped on?
I particularly like the Darnell Mooney and a second one. I really like that one. I think that's good. That's a good deal if you're trying to go out and trade for George Pickens. George Pickens is very interesting. One, he seems to be having a few good games. He's a big play guy. He can help you win fantasy league weeks, so you like that. He has gotten a lot of recognition lately. So you have wide receiver 19 up there for us. But if you're going out in the market, you might have to pay like back end wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 prices because people have now seen what he can do and they're kind of holding on to him, and they might charge you a little bit more than wide receiver 19 type prices for him. So I think he's exciting. I don't have him as a buy in my work yet, but he might be at some point here. So not going to hate against it, and definitely like if you could do Darnell Mooney in a second for him, that'd be great.
I would do all these deals because I'm not afraid like Jay over here. I will definitely. I don't mind taking the there, and I just think the targets are there. I do think Pittsburgh's going to go get a wide receiver in the draft. I do think that they're going to target that, so that's something to note. And then the other takeaway too from just this round, Anthony Richardson. So this was pre his game today. Now his game today was a top 5 quarterback. So when he plays, he's like Fields. When he's out there, he is rushing upside. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. He's there. And if he consistently does this. So in this mock, I got him at 512. I'd be interested to see what his value is based on after today's game, because Dynasty is such a fickle game. It is just such a, it's a fickle there. I would imagine 3rd round, maybe late 2nd, probably. Like, it'd be interesting to see kind of what his value is after this. But you're still on Richardson, right?
Yeah, so Richardson's tough. It's kind of a weird story for me. So I was in on him in college. I was in on him as a prospect. And then when people started running away with him being the next great thing, and that he was actually traded at almost QB1, like the actual QB1, above Josh Allen and Pat Mahomes. So he was like in that range as like where people thought of him as the dynasty QB1 going forward. And that was like this offseason. People were thinking that. So that's where I was kind of, I'm not really sure about that. I mean, he's still a young type of guy. And I think 2 weeks ago when he was benched and he went through that little snafu, it was really hard to trade him away. I think it was really hard to find the trade partner unless you were going to move him for an extreme discount. And I still think he's probably trading a little bit below what his actual worth is to dynasty players. So I think if you want to go and get Anthony Richardson right now, as long as you're not giving away too much for it, I think you can still buy him at a reasonable price. But I would just caution that you gotta keep in mind prices. Don't go and give what you were going to give this offseason for Anthony Richardson anymore. That price is different than what it was at 3 months ago. So I do think that he can offer you differentiated fantasy points at the QB position that can win you weeks right now. And so if that's what you need, that's pretty interesting. You can get at a fairly reasonable cost, and maybe he runs in a couple of touchdowns every game, or maybe he runs for 60 yards and passes for 200 yards, and you get a couple of touchdowns. That is fantasy gold. Now you don't know the longevity of it, so you can't go out and pay 3 firsts for him. You just can't do that. No. But if you stay reasonable, I'd say if he's on your team and you were really fretting about it 2 weeks ago and you decided to hold him, I'd say right now, probably hold him for a little bit longer until you get that market price appreciation And then if he skyrockets, if you see him back in the QB1 ranks, back in QB1 ranks, and you really want to sell, then you can sell.
The Colts ain't going nowhere, that quarterback position, boys. Like, I hate to break it to you, it's going to be Richardson. So he's going to have that value up in the summer too. Like, it just, they have no option. This is their option, and that's what it's going to be. And that's kind of where I was at anyway. I'm glad he's out there now and playing there. Now, from a Devy standpoint, I'm going to run through all the Devy picks. Then we'll kind of give some generic thoughts here. First QB off the board was Arch Manning at QB 17, which I think is funny. Like, he's that 101 from quarterback spot. QB 18 was Cam Ward at 506. Wide receiver 23 overall was freshman Alabama wide receiver Ryan Williams. Wide receiver 30 was Missouri wide receiver Luther Burden. QB 24 was Nico. Nico from Tennessee. I got to get your last name, but I apologize. And then running back 11 is Ohio State running back Quinshon Judkins. After that, at wide receiver 33 is Emeka Egbuka. Too low. I don't know what propaganda is going on out there about Emeka, but that is too low for me. QB 25 is Quinn Ewers, and in getting drafted ahead of QB 27, which was Shador Sanders. Tight end 9 was Colston Loveland, and then running back 19 was Travion Henderson there. Any takeaways from these Devy guys that got drafted?
I think it's interesting that Arch is QB1 now in the Devy ranks. I think I like that actually. I like that take a lot. I think there's a couple of good Devy QBs right now, but it's a short list, and I think Arch probably be at the top of that list. DJ Lagway is probably close to that after some of the games that he's been having. But if you look at sort of where the range is on value for Arch Manning at QB 17, that's in the range of like JJ McCarthy. Would you rather have JJ McCarthy or Arch Manning at this level? See that? Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. I think people have to wrestle with that. Now, if you can get Arch Manning at QB 17, but that happens to be a couple rounds lower than where JJ McCarthy went, well, maybe just because there's a break in QBs and everybody got there too. But I think that's fairly interesting. Another one that I like, I've been pretty high on Emeka Egbuka right now. You can get Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver 33. So to give you an idea of some of the wide receivers there around wide receiver 33, if you were just looking at the NFL, that'd be like a Josh Downs, Cooper Kupp, Ricky Parasol, Jordan Addison, Chris Godwin. I kind of like taking Emeka Egbuka at that type of range, especially if there's a couple actually Debbys in front of them there. So that those names actually might be a little bit lower than those names that I just read off of in terms of value. So wide receiver 33 for Emeka Egbuka is pretty interesting for me. It's interesting that Shador Sanders, I think he's now sort of a consensus high-end first-round pick. So if that's the case, for next year, he's definitely probably not going to be what QB 27 going forward. No. I'm not particularly enthralled with his profile, but anybody that's going to go in the top end of the first round, there's a lot of value that'll probably be increasing. So that's an interesting one as well. Travion Henderson running back 19 seems like a nice deal for him. I like him, especially if you can. We got Judkins going. I can't remember, it was a couple rounds or a round earlier. And then at RB 11, and then you get Travion at RB 19. That seems like a pretty good value versus the two. Maybe Judkins went too early and Henderson went a little bit too late, and they should be somewhere in the middle. But that's interesting as well.
No one knows. No one knows what to do with those guys. We're swinging at the fences there. But no, I'm on board with you with Emeka. I'm also on board with you, Shador. Shador gets drafted round 1, top 5. Shador's going to be QB 13-ish, 14 in Dynasty. Like, he'll be around that range. That's just where it goes. So I think building into that. Also, Colston Loveland getting drafted ahead of Tyler Warren here. We'll talk about Tyler Warren in the next 4 rounds. That was not me, by the way. So no bias out there. Don't be yelling at me because I was a Michigan guy that drafted him there. Yeah, I did not do that one. All right, let's jump over to the next 4 rounds here. So this is, our 9, 10, 11, and 12 rounds. So a guy that really pops off right away is like Jameson Williams, who is literally Deshaun Jackson. 3 catches, 100 yards, a touchdown, or nothing, or he gets suspended. Like, that is where he's at. He got drafted first overall there. This is also first overall in this draft in the 9th round. So that's 901. And tight end 2 range is where the dynasty kind of takeaway I have here. So these are after those tiers of tight ends, right? When you're looking at those top 7 or 8. Then you have these other guys. Kelsey, which I don't know if I'm taking Kelsey in any dynasty draft at this point. Andrew sitting there at 9-10. Njoku at 9-11. Otten, who I was a big fan of Otten at Washington for the Devy area there. Kind of going that 10:05 range. Oh, I almost said Gronk, but that was Tyler Warren going at tight end 14. Tucker Kraft, Ingram. So these are your tight end 2 guys. Anybody stand out to you in your tight end 2 kind of profiles there? Or you can talk about Tyler Warren as well, since he got drafted in that range too.
Gosh, right now what I'd have Colston Loveland slightly ahead of Tyler Warren, but and then I'd have Harold Fannin Jr. as the 3 tight ends that I'm super excited about in this draft. And it's some interesting profiles in terms of size perspective, but Tyler Warren seems to is having a tremendous year this year. And so I think there's a lot of people have him as their tight end 1s. I just have Colston Loveland just from an age perspective as a little bit higher ranked than Tyler Warren because I like the early declare type guys, assuming they both come out. But those are interesting tight ends that we're going to add to this tight end rank. Like tight ends are tough unless you get one like a high end tight end 1. And even those guys are really hit or miss at some point in a lot of places as well. I mean, last year we were coming into the league with Sam Laporta as our surefire tight end 1, pricing him up there with some high end wide receivers, and you saw what happened to his value this year as well. Brock Bowers coming in and doing well is really, really, really nice. If you can have one of these guys, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin Jr. come in, and mix it in with those group of guys, then maybe we can get like a group of guys that maybe we get 8 deep or something like that, where maybe you can find a value in there. But gosh, the tight end 2s, the tight end back end tight end 1s is sort of a miserable landscape, and hopefully we get some more guys that we can add to that group.
To me, the 3 guys that stand out: Warren at tight end 14, I'm with you on that. Like, if you can get him cheaper than Loveland at this point, if you do that. Yeah. Njoku, to me, is still a buy. I still like him in that offense. I still like him there. And I think the most underrated player at the tight end position, I wrote about him last week in our Substack, Cade Otton. I loved Cade Otton coming in. I think, into that situation, he's developed really well. He's developed a great relationship with Baker Mayfield. And we've talked about that wide receiver room. I don't know what's going to go on with Godwin. Mike Evans is getting older. I do think that when you're thinking of targets and targets earned and what he's been able to do, Cade Otton could be the number 2 on that team next year. And he is the 1 right now, just based on default because of injuries, but he could be that number 2 guy there. To me, the tight end 2 range is good. In this range, those are the guys I would target in this range as well. As far as like underperforming rookies, you have some guys in here that just, when you're thinking of some of the rookies out there, A.D. Mitchell comes to mind. Like, what are we doing there? We talked about this before in this pod. Do you move on or do you buy into a little bit more, right? A.D. Mitchell going 11th round. I'd probably lean somewhere else. I'd actually like taking a veteran in that spot as like my wide receiver 4 with upside, at least for 1 year. Other guys in that range that could be like, they're just haven't performed very well. I know he's not a rookie, but Bryce went in this range in the 13th round. Ricky Pearsall, I know he got shot, but has struggled kind of with Ayuk not being there. Has still struggled out there. He's kind of getting outperformed by Juwan Jennings. So when you're thinking of that, there are some veteran wide receivers, some day 3 running backs in there. The one thing I want to ask you, and this is just off the cuff in terms of these day 3 running backs, are you in? Are you out? Who would you rather draft in this 12th round? Tyrone Tracy or Bucky Irving? Where are you going?
Bucky Irving would probably be who I'd draft. That just is a function of the way that I look at things. So the way my prospect model is, it relies on data heavily. And Bucky Irving was a very good prospect from a data perspective. And he came in and, it was an ambiguous backfield with Rachaad White and even Sean Tucker and maybe another guy in there as well. But Bucky Irvin's looked pretty good. And I think what his skill set is fairly interesting, where even if he does have to share the backfield with Rachaad White, he can still carve out a piece of that backfield for himself, let alone performing really well and taking over more of the backfield. So I think that he is, from a prospect perspective, I think he makes more sense for me. Now, Tyrone Tracy has more value at the moment, just because he has the more opportunity than Bucky Irvin, because there's nobody really that he's competing with. Devin Singletary has been in and out a couple times, but he's largely getting a lot of that volume, and he's getting priced that way. And you'll see a lot of those situations where maybe he's not the best prospect, but he does get a ton of volume. And that's really what you want to find if you're looking for that running back. And so I've always been of the opinion that I go for the better prospect, and because situation always has had tendency to change over time. But I can understand why you select either side, but I'd go Bucky for sure.
Yeah, Tyrone's also going to be 25 and Bucky's 22. So there's that age kind of discrepancy there. I'd probably go Bucky as well. I think he's performed well enough to where you're like, yeah, I would take the shot on there. Now, as far as Devy, there's a lot of Devy guys going in these rounds. I'm going to go through them all. We're going to kind of mention them a little bit. So, Amari Hampton, running back 23. Running back 25 is Nicholas Singleton. Running back 26, Dylan Sampson. Running back 28, Caleb Johnson. Wide receiver 45 is Travis Hunter. Running back 29, Trevor Etienne. And then Tyler Warren is tied in 14 there. First of all, this is where all the 25 running backs go because no one knows what the hell to do with them. They're all in the same tier, and they're just drafting these guys. And I think it's pretty good value to a lot of these guys, even going through it now. Wide receiver 48, Isaiah Bond. Wide receiver 49 is Carnell Tate. QB 31, we got DJ Lagway, the true freshman out of Florida, who's really kind of showed something against his win against LSU. Running back 33 is Jonah Coleman. QB 32 is Drew Aller. Wide receiver 51 is Zachariah Branch. Wide receiver 53 is Evan Stewart. And then finally, to wrap up the Devy guys here, running back 35, Devin Neal, who's kind of getting forgotten about in the 25 class after he came back. Ryan Wingo, true freshman out of Texas at wide receiver 54, and a running back 39, Nate Frazier. Those two guys right there, if you play Devy, those are values right now because I think the tier, I got asked this question. I thought it was an interesting question. I don't remember where I got asked it. It might have been on YouTube. They asked me what the tier is between Wingo and Ryan Williams. I don't think it's this big based on this draft. When you're looking at kind of where each guy went, I'm kind of like, you know what? If you're looking at it and Ryan Williams is going in that range of like wide receiver 23 and now Ryan Wingo's at wide receiver 54, it's definitely not that big. That tier is not that big there. With Javonte Cook transferring out of Texas, Wingo could be the wide receiver 1 for Arch Manning next year. And if Arch is going QB1 and we were thinking about what Wingo could do in that offense, that is a potential buy for me. Like Wingo could be a buy out there in this format. And Nate Frazier also could be running back 1 in the 27 class for running backs too, after what he's kind of done for Georgia the last couple of weeks. So those two guys stand out to me as pretty big values.
Yeah. If you were going back to the beginning, if you were going for the 0 RB build, this is really the sweet spot. If you waited, if you didn't take Junkins back when you could have taken him at RB11 and you waited and you took, if you got, maybe you went around ahead and you got Amari and Hampton around ahead, and then you got Caleb or, Nicholas Singleton the next round, and then Caleb Johnson the next round, that would have been an amazing 0 RB build, because I think all of those guys have a chance at being relevant dynasty running back. So that is really, really interesting to me. And I like that as a strategy. Travis Hunter, I think he gets the discount. We're going to talk about him in a second. I think he gets the discount just because we don't know what position he's going to be in. But like, he's having just a tremendous year. I think when all is said and done, he'll probably get pushed up a little bit higher than this, which is interesting. And then, a lot of other guys in that group. Carnell Tate is a really interesting wide receiver. He'll probably, in my eyes, he's probably the top of the 2026 wide receiver class, and you're getting him at wide receiver 49. That's pretty interesting. Even in a down year, you could still find some pretty good prospects in that class. And if he's the first wide receiver taken that year, he'll be a high-end rookie pick, and he'll probably get some buzz at some point. So that one seems interesting. And we mentioned DJ Lagway before, but Drew Aller is really, really, here we got him at QB 32. I'm high on Drew Aller. Christian's high on Drew Aller. He hits a lot of the data perspective, from a data perspective, the metrics I look at for success in QBs. And I think, whether he comes out this year or next year, I think he's a really interesting high upside type of guy that you can take at QB 32. That's a guy I'd want to take a shot on at that level.
Yeah, that's you guys are higher on Drew Aller than I am, so I'm not going to go there. I'll let you guys pontificate about our guy there. But I will say this. Cardell Tate is a value, and so is Brandon Ennis, who I don't even know if got drafted in this. I'm not sure if he did, but those two guys are my biggest buys right now. I think Cardell Tate, Brandon Ennis, the wide receiver from Ohio State. You hit it on the head there. And talking about that and going through it there. Now let's go through the next 4 rounds. Let's talk about rounds 13 through 16. These are the last 4 rounds that we did. When you do these types of drafts, we can't go super deep because people get it's hard. It's hard enough getting 12 guys to do this, and it's harder to go any deeper than this. But really, from the dynasty perspective on these rounds, some deep dynasty shots that I think are worth mentioning here. Quentin Johnston, man, I wrote about him last week. He looks like he could be a wide receiver 2. Like, it looks like that could be a ceiling, right? Like, maybe he won't pan out to be that wide receiver 1 that they have, but he's earned some targets. He's kind of, he scored a touchdown. I know it's a little feast or famine. It's not something that you could just, he's not a plug and play type of guy. Like, I understand that. Like, you're probably nervous about him this year. Hey, will he do what he needs to do? But he's been solid. I mean, and if the Chargers add a true wide receiver 1 to the roster, I think Quentin could be a very good wide receiver 2, or if they add a guy like Warren or Loveland in the draft, and then they kind of lean on Johnson being that guy, pretty complimentary there. Like, and I think with Herbert at the upside, big playability, red zone, that's a shot we're taking there. Rondale Robinson is also there. Jalen Wright is a guy that I'm still kind of believing in. I think can take that role next year in that team. Ben Sinnott, Jatavian Sanders, I'm keep pounding the table for him. I called him a buy 2 weeks ago. He keeps scoring touchdowns for him. Like, he looks pretty good there. Any of these guys stand out to you, Jay, or anybody that I didn't mention in this range?
No, I think those are interesting. Ben Sinnott hasn't really played much, so we'll see what he is probably next year. I don't know if this is the year. And so if you want to buy low, you got to buy at the proper price. So don't buy what you paid for him in the rookie draft after what we've seen so far this year, which is not much anything. And Wandale, in the right circumstance, he scores you a lot of points and doesn't cost very much. So I've always had sort of this positive affinity towards him because the price you have to pay for him is not very high. Nobody thinks of him as the wide receiver 1, and he can put up those spike weeks. And if you need a player to hit on those bye weeks, and fairly consistently, he can put up decent weeks every once in a while. So those are 2 interesting ones for me.
Yeah, I mean, Rondale is Christian Kirk now. That's the new Christian Kirk in my mind. Like, PPR guy. Maybe has a better quarterback finally next year, possibly. We'll see what's going to go on there. Gets targets, and in PPR, not flashy. 12 points. Oh, okay, I can plug him in the flex. Like, I do think that at this price, he went in the 16th round in this draft. Obviously, the combined Devy helped that, but still, like, that's a pretty good value for a guy that has a capital, has a role, knows it, team likes it. There is some things there with that. Now, when you go into the Devy stuff, there's a lot more in this one, so I'm going to get through it all. Running back 40, Justice Haynes. Running back 41, C.J. Baxter Jr. Tight end 16, Harold Fannin Jr., a guy that Jay mentioned earlier as being his tight end 3-ish. Wide receiver 61, Nick Marsh, is a guy that we talked about last week on our 27 rankings there. Running back 49, Jeremiah Love, who, I think has a chance to fight for that running back 1 spot of that class, so that's pretty good value. Wide receiver 62 is T.J. Moore. QB 36, Dylan Raiola. He has not looked like Patrick Mahomes the last 6 weeks of the college football season. He struggled there. He get those comps a lot. Then we have at wide receiver 64, Trey Harris. Running back 51, Jay Knott. Wide receiver 65, Barian Brown. Jalen Milroe, QB 38. PFF's QB1 right now. Just going to throw that out there. That's their QB1. Wide receiver 67, Micah Hudson. Running back 52, Kyle McGonaghy. Wide receiver 68, Cam Coleman, who just blew up this last week. Darius Taylor at running back 53. Running back 54 was Ollie Gordon. Running back 55, Jordan James. Running back 56, Jared Gibson. And then finally, to wrap it up for the Devy players, wide receiver 76, Dane Key. Any takeaways from this group, Jay?
Yeah, I would say my focus in this sort of range would be on the younger guys that have, if they're sophomores that have had good freshman year and had pretty decent sophomore years, as opposed to the older guys that are maybes.
Yeah.
Not quite maybes. And so like a Darius Taylor is really interesting to me because he's just continues to put up great numbers every year that he's been playing. And so it's at Minnesota, but it's pretty good numbers. And so that would be a guy that I think probably increases in value as opposed to the maybes that along the way. Like a Barian Brown is a maybe to me. And I do think that's interesting. Barian Brown, Dane Key this year has been a flip for me. So Dane Key has looked like the better NFL prospect than Barian Brown just from the play on the field this year. And if you account for the first 3 year or all 3 years, Dane Key looks like a better prospect right now than Barian Brown, but Barian Brown certainly has the physical gifts to be an NFL wide receiver. So we'll see how that all plays out. But I think that's kind of interesting as well. But a lot of good young guys to select here. And yeah, I'd be dipping my toes into some of these to the Devy players. This is where you can get some really good value if you listen to the Devy Real and you are up on these names and these guys, you'll probably get some guys in these ranges where, they go on and become high-end rookie picks, and then you've created so much value by selecting them in this type of range, 16th round, stuff like that, where you could just get sort of like a middling type of NFL player that never really gives you differentiated value. Might find a diamond in the rough and create a lot of value here in this range.
My 4 favorite values for Devy in this group, in this 4 rounds here. TJ Moore, wide receiver 62. I think Pat has a possibility to fight up. Like, obviously production hasn't been great. That Clemson offense hasn't been great. Jeremiah Love and Nick Marsh. Those 3 stand out to me the most, especially Nick Marsh. I do think I'm a little higher on him than most. But then when you go to the other guy, Cam Coleman, sitting there, wide receiver 68. Like, Cam could, again, we talked about that 27 class of wide receivers. It's solid. And if Cam's going to do that and produce, like, I'll take that all day. Like, that's pretty good value there for a guy that's going to probably be in that rounds 8 to probably 7, 8 next year. Like, if we're coming back here and talking about this, like, he's going to jump up there. Now, if you listen on the podcast, you can't see this, but everybody on YouTube, we have all Devy players drafted. I put it on the screen for you guys. So you basically can see everybody pause it, screenshot it, whatever the hell you want to do there. It shows you kind of what every player's values are and where they were drafted to help you. The whole point of this is just to help you get your idea. If you play Devy or if you play college fantasy, or even if you want to see where the 25 picks are going, right? This shows you who would be your 101 through 112-ish and then a little bit more of the 25 class. This gives you a big board without having to do your own big board. Now, obviously we have different big boards out there, but I think it is a good value game there. Now, the last thing we're going to do is just talk about the guys that didn't get drafted. Who's our best players available that are still on the board? So let's talk with Devy quarterbacks first, and then we're going to go position by position. So start with quarterbacks. Still on the board is Carson Beck. I don't know. Like, if, I think some are in or out on him, depending on where you're at there. Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, who has not had a great down the stretch by any means. Lenore Sellers from South Carolina. Jackson Arnold, and then Julie from Oklahoma right now, possibly could be moving on after this season. And then Julian Sayin from Ohio State. So anybody stand out to you here?
Yeah, I mean, numbers-wise, Jackson Dart stands out this year. He's had a really interesting career, and this year he's putting up some significant numbers. Data-wise, if you just look at the numbers, it's a very decent profile, and if he gets drafted in the first round, I'd be very interested in him. I think he'll increase it quite a bit in value, but there's a long way to go there for him, so we'll see how that plays out. And Lenore Seller, as an upside perspective, I think what we saw this past weekend was pretty incredible. And so he's a really big upside type of player. I know there's a lot of development that has to happen there, but you just see what could be from him. And that's interesting. He'll probably increase in value after this week. I don't think he would go undrafted. I think he'd probably be part of the mix up there in selecting. And then we talked about this last week. Julian Sayin is probably a buy. If he ends up being the Ohio State quarterback next year, you're going to want to have Julian Sayin, so that he's got one of a decent path in terms of increasing his value substantially from not even being drafted in this Devy Dynasty draft to somebody that could go quite a bit higher if he is the quarterback for Ohio State next year.
The one thing I would say about Sellers, a lot raw, just very raw. You're going to have to really kind of go through there. What's that development look like? You're right about saying, though, if he's the Ohio State quarterback next year and looks good the first 4 weeks, that dude's gonna go top 5 rounds. Like, that guy, he's QB1 of that class. Like, that's just gonna how it goes. As far as best players available left at the running back spot, DJ Giddens from Kansas State, Jam Miller from Alabama, Quentin Martin from Penn State, Taylor Tatum from Oklahoma, Damian Martinez from Miami, Caden Durham from LSU. Me personally, it's Caden Durham, LSU running back. I really like what I've seen from him, his profile. I would have taken him ahead of some of those other guys that were drafted at that running back position.
Yeah, and it's hard to really tell. I mean, I think Caden Durham, yes, I agree. And I think DJ Giddens is one that I think gets overlooked quite a bit. And maybe it's because he plays at Kansas State, but he's having a really good season this season.
Yeah.
And I think he's an interesting prospect. He's a maybe shot for me. It really depends on where he goes in the draft this year. But that's an interesting one as well.
Yeah. All right. Wide receivers. Antonio Williams from Clemson. Eugene Wilson. Gosh, dang it. Eugene Wilson. Come on, baby. From Florida. Hasn't really, he struggled a little bit. Alec Aomaner from Stanford. Again, struggled a little bit. Bryant Wesco, some would argue, is better than TJ Moore. He was still on board there from Clemson. Kevin Concepcion from NC State. And then Perry Thompson from Auburn. Anybody in there stand out for you?
I mean, what's interesting is I'd probably be taking shots on some of these guys versus selecting middling NFL players. So, like Bryant Wesco is really interesting. A lot of these guys are really interesting to me. I mean, I was pretty high on Perry Thompson coming in this season. If you believe some of the draft pundits out there, Elic Anamer out of Stanford, he might be selected in the top 50 picks of the NFL draft. I'm not sure if that's the case, if that's what ends up happening, but if that's the case, and going from undrafted through 16 plus rounds to being a top 50 pick in the NFL draft, that's pretty good. And I would just mention that his age adjusted metrics look pretty good. And Antonio Williams, he had a good first year, and the rest there, he's been injured, and this year he's had a couple of good games, but if he can start getting that production up there, he's interesting as well as a slot guy. What he could do in the NFL could be interesting, but we'll see how that is. But yeah, I'd say Bryant Wesco is the one that stands out the most for me on this list.
Best, the thing with Antonio Williams, ironically, he might have his best production year this year. He's bounced back last couple of weeks. Against Pitt, he had 13 catches, 149 yards. I think I put it in the Discord, and then 2 touchdowns. I was like, man, he's just getting targets. He's targeted up the storm out there, and he has been, and he could probably finish high. I'm still on with him. I just don't know if he declares, because if he declares, there's a lot of jumble of guys in there. So, like, that worries me. I did talk about it in our Discord, like, hey, it'd be fun if he transferred to Penn State, go give Aller a target next year if Aller comes back, kind of gives him that guy. That'd be a fun offense to have around there. We'll run through tight ends quickly. Luke Lachey, 2025, Mason Taylor, Lawson Lucky, Luke Haas, Oscar Delp, who has looked okay the last couple weeks for Georgia. Bryson Nesbitt has been Jay's guy. We've talked about him there. Anything huge on this? I guess you could put Gunnar Helms out there from Texas. I mean, Luke Lachey could possibly, but just the production hasn't been there.
Yeah, you don't necessarily always see production out of these guys. So it really comes down to athleticism and draft capital in the end. And do you have the potential to be fantasy relevant? So I think a lot of these guys probably do, but I'm not sure how many of these guys end up being dynasty relevant. I personally have liked Luke Haas and Bryson Nesbitt for some time. I think they are good profiles in terms of who can be athletic and potentially get that draft capital. And there's been some production along the way at points. But I guess Luke Haas is having a little bit of a downer year compared to what my expectations were coming into this year. So, but yeah, good group of guys.
Yeah, that's how we feel about tight ends out there. It's a good group of guys. Now, I think the point Jay's making too, when you can get a guy like Harold Fannin Jr., who is free, essentially, probably no one drafts him in Devy, it's hard to take Devy tight ends. It just is, because you could draft Harold Fannin in your rookie, in your depleted rookie draft. So, like, there is like these guys are out there, but, overdrafted that position is just not something to do. As far as like best players left in dynasties that were still on the board, Aaron Rodgers still out there. Russell Wilson, Steelers are 8-2 at this point. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there, if they bring him back or not. And if they do, dynasty quarterback too, and if they give him a 2-year deal, like, he's still there. Tyjae Spears was still on the board. Jalen Polk was still out there. Romeo Doubs, Cole Kmet, Isaiah Likely. Nothing stands out like, oh my gosh, I like those guys. I do think Russell's an interesting guy though. I think if Russell Wilson, with whatever's going on in Pittsburgh, they make the playoffs, they just beat the Ravens. like, I think that Russell could be that QB2 that you're like, that's not a bad based on where he went. I mean, he's probably going in the QB like 40 range in the combined range area. He was still on the board here after 16 rounds. I'd take a shot on him.
Yeah, I mean, we are playing Dynasty here, so I understand why Aaron Rodgers and Russ Wilson did not get picked, because you're just worried about the longevity. But like, if you were playing a real league, those guys would be on a team. So you're gonna want starting quarterbacks. So I get that we probably would have gone a couple more rounds, and those guys would have been gone pretty easily, because you need that third quarterback or fourth quarterback to hold you over, and those are really important in Dynasty. I think it's really interesting. Like, Jalen Polk was thought of as pretty high. He was a high end pick last year. And sort of the fall, he really hasn't panned out to be what we thought he was going to be at the beginning of the season. So that's an interesting to me to see the fall from him.
Yeah, no, that's hard. I think it's going to be interesting where it comes from. I was going to go back to your point about dynasty quarterbacks are important. As someone who had to start Mac Jones the last couple of weeks in the league because I have had some guys injured, very important to kind of shore up that running or that quarterback room for you out there. Now, here's the big board for the entire thing, so you can kind of see where all the dynasty players went on top of where you see those Devy players. The Devy players are all picked like old players at that position, so you can kind of go through there and kind of look at it. But we're going to just kind of wrap this up. We're going to talk about kind of overall what we think of just the Dynasty Devy recap here of what you should be doing. And really just comes down to my strategy. I'll kind of run through it, let Jay kind of take us out. But target value risers, guys that we kind of pivoted, like the Devy guys, for example, the guys that we said, Jeremiah Love, TJ Moore, those guys right now, Julian Sand, Caden Durham, like those guys are my guy. Bryant Wesco, those type of guys that could possibly just shoot up in value as the guys you target there. Don't overdraft quarterbacks for the love of everything. I've been preaching this forever in Devy, but even in Dynasty, be very careful with those QB2s, and be very careful with not targeting like the veteran QB like a Russell Wilson as your QB2 would worry me. QB3 as a bridge is great if you hit the right bridge quarterback. You hit that guy that you're going after, but stop overvaluing quarterbacks. And I think with Arch Manning going QB17, I don't think players are anymore, because I think some QBs would have been top 12. Caleb would have probably went 108 last year when we did this. I think he did go 108 to 109. So there is some baked in like, oh, maybe we're not just going to go draft those QBs too hard. Target profiles, go after the profiles that you like, the ones that do well. Think of like the running backs that you're looking for, like a Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, who could possibly get better draft capital than people are thinking right now. So if you are in some type of combined draft or early in the offseason doing these type of drafts, that's a guy to kind of think about. And always join our Patreon. We have the combined rankings already. We have the trade calculator. We have all of that stuff kind of combined in there that can help you out here. Any final takeaways on this draft or what you saw, Jay?
No, that you wrapped it up perfectly. I don't really have too much to add to that. I would just say, if you are really interested in this type of stuff, if you join up on the TDR Patreon, there's a lot of value that we can add to your process, and there's a lot of different things we can, just involved in discussion, trade calculator, rankings, Dynasty Devy rankings, all combined, and it really helps you think through, even if you're not playing Devy in particular, but sort of where those rookie picks might look like next year or the year after that, you can sort of be ahead of the game if you follow this sort of process and join in the Patreon.
Yeah. No, he wrapped that up good. We'll see you guys next week. We appreciate you guys joining. Hit us up in the comments, though. What do you think about this type of draft? Does it help you? What kind of value are you looking for? What kind of drafts are you guys looking at there as we go into it? We're going to be dropping another 2025 rookie mock soon with landing spots. We're going to kind of go through some mock drafts out there, find some fun and some nasty landing spots for our favorite 25 prospects, and then we're going to draft them for you guys. So we appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys on the next episode.